The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust, so thick that Zara Bennett could taste the grit between her teeth. And for the first time in 3 weeks of bone-rattling travel, she wondered if silence might actually kill her before this harsh land ever could. She pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat, steadying herself as the driver's boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. Through the small window, she could see Nebraska City spreading out before her like a promise half-kept. The buildings were newer than she had expected, their wood still pale against the endless blue sky. It was 1879, and this corner of Nebraska was trying desperately to shake off its frontier roughness and become something resembling civilization. The railroad had brought commerce, but it had also brought expectations, and Zara carried the weight of both in the worn carpetbag clutched in her lap. The door swung open, and afternoon sunlight flooded the coach interior. The driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes, extended his weathered hand. "Nebraska City, miss. End of the line." Zara took his hand and stepped down onto the packed earth of the main street. Her legs trembled after so many days of travel, first by train from Boston, then by this stagecoach for the final leg of the journey. She straightened her traveling dress, a sensible gray wool that had seemed appropriate back east, but now felt suffocating in the prairie heat. Around her, the town hummed with afternoon activity. A wagon rolled past loaded with lumber. 2 women in sunbonnets stood outside the general store, their conversation pausing as they noticed the newcomer. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. "You meeting someone, miss?" the driver asked as he hauled her trunk down from the top of the coach. Zara opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The words were there in her mind, clear as crystal, but they remained trapped behind her lips like birds in a cage. She tried again, forcing air through her throat, but only managed a small, strangled sound that made her cheeks burn with shame. The driver's expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, then to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "You all right, miss?" she nodded vigorously, reaching into her reticule for the letter. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it, holding it up for him to read. The words were etched into her memory. "Warren Zimmerman, Zimmerman Ranch, 3 miles west of Nebraska City. I will collect you upon your arrival." "Ah, you are Warren Zimmerman's intended," the driver said, his voice gentler now. "Fine, man. You will be waiting here then." Zara nodded again, managing what she hoped was a reassuring smile. The driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving her alone in this strange town, but another passenger was already climbing into the coach. He tipped his hat to her and climbed back onto his perch. As the stagecoach rattled away, Zara stood alone on the dusty street with her trunk and carpetbag, feeling the weight of a dozen curious stares. The 2 women outside the general store had resumed their conversation, but their eyes kept darting her way. A man in a leather apron, probably the blacksmith, had paused his work to watch her. She could feel their questions hanging in the air like the dust that still swirled from the stagecoach wheels. She had known this moment would come. From the instant she had answered Warren Zimmerman's advertisement in the Boston newspaper, she had known she would have to face this. A mail-order bride was already an oddity, a woman desperate or brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. But a mail-order bride who could not speak, that was something else entirely. The letter exchange had been her salvation. Warren's advertisement had been straightforward, almost businesslike. Rancher, age 26, seeks educated woman for marriage. Must be of good character and willing to embrace frontier life. Write to Warren Zimmerman, Nebraska City, Nebraska. She had spent 3 evenings crafting her response, choosing each word with painstaking care. She had told him about her education at a Boston finishing school, about her love of reading and her skill with numbers. She had mentioned her late parents, her lack of other family, her desire for a new beginning. She had written about her strong constitution and her willingness to work hard. What she had not mentioned was her voice, or rather, the lack of it. The condition had begun after the fever that killed her parents 5 years ago when she was 19. She had been ill herself, delirious for nearly a week, and when she finally recovered, her voice had simply vanished. The doctors had examined her throat and found no physical cause. One had suggested it was psychological, a trauma response to watching both her parents die within days of each other. Another had prescribed various tonics and treatments, none of which had helped. Eventually, she had accepted her new reality. Zara Bennett would spend the rest of her life in silence. At first, her parents' friends had been sympathetic, but sympathy had a short shelf life. As the months passed and her voice did not return, invitations had dwindled. People found her presence unsettling. Conversations became awkward, one-sided affairs. The young men who might have courted her looked elsewhere for wives who could speak their vows aloud, who could call to their children, who could make small talk at social gatherings. She had supported herself by taking in sewing and working as a bookkeeper for a textile merchant, but Boston was expensive, and her parents' modest savings had dwindled. When she saw Warren Zimmerman's advertisement, something had stirred in her chest. A frontier ranch would be different from Boston society. Out here, perhaps her silence would matter less. Work would speak louder than words, and in her letters she could be eloquent. Warren's responses had been thoughtful and honest. He had written about his ranch, 500 acres of prime grazing land that he had built up over the past 7 years. He had described the house, modest but sturdy, and the challenges of ranch life. He had been clear that he needed a partner, not just a housekeeper, someone who could manage the books and help with decisions. He had written about loneliness, about watching the sun set over the prairie with no one to share it with. His words had been simple but genuine, and with each letter, Zara had felt hope growing inside her like a flame. She had meant to tell him about her voice before she left Boston. She had drafted the letter a dozen times, but each version had felt inadequate. How could she explain in writing something so fundamental, so potentially deal-breaking? In the end, she had convinced herself that it would be better to tell him in person, or rather, to show him in person. She would arrive. She would present him with the letter she had prepared explaining everything, and he would either accept her as she was or send her back. It was a risk, she knew, but she had nothing left to lose. Now, standing in the middle of Nebraska City with the afternoon sun beating down on her bonnet, that risk felt terrifyingly real. "Excuse me, miss." Zara turned to find a young woman approaching, perhaps a year or two younger than her own 24 years. She had a friendly face, round and sun-browned, with wisps of blonde hair escaping from beneath her bonnet. "I am sorry to intrude," the woman said, "but I saw you arrive, and I thought you might need some help." "Are you waiting for someone?" Zara nodded, grateful for the kindness. She reached into her reticule again, this time pulling out the small notebook and pencil she always carried. She wrote quickly, "Waiting for Warren Zimmerman. Thank you for your concern." The woman read the note and her expression brightened. "Oh, Warren, he is a good man. I am Helen Parker. My husband runs the feed store." She gestured to a building across the street. "Would you like to wait in the store? It is cooler inside and you can sit down. Warren should be along shortly. He comes into town most afternoons to check for his mail." Zara hesitated, then wrote, "I do not want to impose." "Nonsense," Helen said firmly. "You have had a long journey and there is no sense standing out here in this heat. Come along." The relief Zara felt was almost overwhelming. She gathered her carpet bag while Helen recruited her husband, a tall, lanky man named Thomas, to carry Zara's trunk. The feed store was dim and cool, smelling of grain and leather. Helen directed her to a chair near the front window and brought her a cup of water from the pump out back. "You are from back east?" Helen asked, settling into a chair beside her. Zara nodded and wrote, "Boston. That is quite a journey. I came from Ohio myself 3 years ago. It was hard at first, but I have grown to love it here. The people are good and there is opportunity." Helen paused, studying Zara with frank curiosity. "You and Warren have been corresponding," Zara wrote, "for 6 months. He is a fine man," Helen said warmly. "Hardworking, honest. A bit quiet maybe, but that is not a bad thing. His ranch is one of the best in the county. You will do well there." Zara managed a smile, though her stomach was tight with anxiety. She had been traveling toward this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, she felt utterly unprepared. What if Warren took one look at her, learned of her condition, and decided she was not what he had bargained for? What if he was angry that she had not told him in her letters? She had enough money for a return ticket to Boston, barely, but what would she return to? The furnished room she had given up? The pitying looks of her neighbors? "Are you all right?" Helen asked, her voice concerned. "You have gone pale," Zara wrote quickly. "Nervous. Natural, I suppose." "Of course it is," Helen said, patting her hand. "Meeting your intended for the first time is frightening, but Warren is kind. I remember when he first came to Nebraska City about 8 years ago. He was younger than you are now, just 18, with nothing but a wagon and a dream. He worked as a ranch hand for old Mr. Peterson for 2 years, saved every penny, and then bought his own land. Built everything himself, with just a few hired hands during roundup season. He has always been fair in his dealings, always kept his word. You could do much worse." The kindness in Helen's voice made Zara's throat tighten with emotion. She had been alone for so long, managing everything herself, that this simple gesture of welcome threatened to undo her completely. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears, and wrote, "You are very kind. Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the street through the window. Zara sipped her water and tried to calm her racing heart. Around them, the feed store hummed with quiet activity. Thomas helped a farmer load sacks of grain onto his wagon. A ranch hand came in for rope and left with a coil over his shoulder. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting everything in gold. Then Helen sat up straighter. "That is Warren now." Zara's heart leaped into her throat. She followed Helen's gaze to see a man riding down the main street on a gray horse. He sat easy in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert, the way of someone who spent most of his life on horseback. He wore a dusty hat pulled low against the sun, a blue work shirt, and worn denims. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from hard physical labor. Warren Zimmerman guided his horse to the hitching post outside the general store and dismounted with fluid grace. When he removed his hat to wipe his forehead, Zara got her first clear look at his face. He was handsome in a weathered, understated way, with strong features and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His dark hair was too long, curling over his collar. He looked tired, she thought, or perhaps just worn down by the constant demands of ranch life. "Should I fetch him?" Helen asked. Zara shook her head quickly. She needed a moment to compose herself. She watched as Warren entered the general store, presumably to check for mail as Helen had predicted. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt, trying to steady herself. 5 minutes later, Warren emerged from the general store with a few letters in his hand. He stood on the boardwalk, reading through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked up and down the street as if searching for something or someone. Helen stood up and moved to the door. "Warren," she called. "Over here." Warren's head turned and he spotted Helen in the doorway. He raised his hand in greeting and started toward the feed store, tucking the letters into his shirt pocket. As he crossed the street, Zara stood up, her carpetbag clutched in both hands like a shield. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. Warren stepped into the feed store, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. When his gaze landed on Zara, he went very still. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers who had shared their hopes and dreams in carefully written letters but had never heard each other's voices or seen each other's faces. "Warren," Helen said, breaking the silence, "your intended has arrived." Warren removed his hat, holding it in both hands. "Miss Bennett," Zara nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Up close, he was even more handsome than she had first thought, with deep-set eyes the color of rich soil and a mouth that looked as if it did not smile often enough. "I am glad you are here safe," Warren said. His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it much. "The stagecoach was on time then," Zara nodded again, and then, before she could lose her courage, she reached into her reticule and pulled out the letter she had written. The letter that explained everything. Her hands shook as she held it out to him. Warren looked at the letter, then at her face, confusion evident in his expression. "What is this?" Helen, sensing something significant was happening, quietly excused herself. "I will go check on Thomas," she murmured, slipping toward the back of the store. Warren took the letter, but he did not open it immediately. "Is something wrong, Miss Bennett?" Zara pulled out her notebook and wrote quickly. "Please read the letter." He looked at the notebook, and understanding began to dawn in his eyes. He unfolded the letter, and Zara watched his face as he read. She had poured everything into that letter, every explanation, every apology, every hope. She had written about the fever, about losing her parents and her voice in one terrible week. She had written about the doctors and their failed treatments. She had written about her loneliness, her desire for a new beginning, her fear that he would reject her. She had been honest about her skills, about what she could offer as a wife and partner despite her silence. She had ended with a simple statement. She would understand if he could not accept her condition, but she hoped he would give her a chance. The silence stretched out as Warren read. Zara could hear every creak of the building, every distant voice on the street, every beat of her own heart. She watched Warren's face, trying to read his expression, but he kept his eyes on the letter, his features carefully neutral. When he finally finished, he folded the letter carefully and looked up at her. His expression was serious, thoughtful, and Zara braced herself for rejection. "You cannot speak at all?" he asked quietly. Zara shook her head. She opened her mouth and tried, forcing air through her throat, but only managed a faint, rasping sound that made her wince. Warren was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "Can you hear me all right?" She nodded, confused by the question. "And you can write quickly, communicate what you need to say?" She nodded again, more vigorously this time. Warren looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "I am going to be honest with you, Miss Bennett. This is not what I expected. I will not lie about that. But I have been thinking on it while I read your letter, and I cannot find a good reason why it should matter all that much." Zara's breath caught. She had expected anger, disappointment, maybe even disgust, but not this calm acceptance. "On a ranch," Warren continued, "most of the work is done in quiet anyway. The cattle do not need conversation, and neither do the horses. What I need is a partner who can think, who can work hard, who can be trusted. Your letters showed me you have a good mind and a strong character." Unless you lied about the rest, I do not see why your voice or the lack of it should change that." He looked up at her then, and she saw sincerity in his eyes. "I asked for an educated woman of good character, and from your letters, that is what you are. The rest we can figure out as we go." Zara felt tears welling up, and this time she did not fight them. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and relieving, washing away weeks of anxiety. She grabbed her notebook with shaking hands and wrote, "You are not angry I did not tell you in my letters." Warren read the note and shook his head. "Disappointed you did not trust me with it sooner, maybe. But I understand why you were afraid. People can be cruel about things they do not understand." He paused, then added, "But I need you to know this. If we are going to build a life together, we have to be honest with each other. No more secrets. Can you promise me that?" Zara wrote. "I promise. No more secrets." "Good." Warren put his hat back on. "Now we have some practical matters to discuss. The Reverend can marry us tomorrow if that suits you. We will need to get you signed up with the land office as my wife, and there are some supplies to pick up. Unless you need more time," Zara wrote quickly. "Tomorrow is fine. I am ready." Warren nodded, and for the first time a hint of a smile crossed his face. "All right then. Let us get your trunk and head back to the ranch. You will want to see your new home before the wedding." As they walked out of the feed store into the afternoon sunlight, Helen appeared from the back. "Everything all right?" she asked, looking between them with concern. "Everything is fine," Warren said. "We will be married tomorrow if you and Thomas would be willing to stand as witnesses." "Of course," Helen beamed. "I would be delighted." Thomas helped Warren load Zara's trunk onto the back of a wagon that was parked nearby. "This is yours." Zara wrote in her notebook, showing it to Warren. "Keep it in town for hauling supplies," Warren explained. "Rode the horse in today, but I figured I would need the wagon to bring you and your things back." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand firm and steady on her elbow. As they drove out of Nebraska City, Zara looked back at the town that would now be her home. It was smaller than Boston, rougher, but there was something honest about it that she appreciated. The buildings might be plain, but they were solid. The people might be curious, but Helen had been kind. This could work, she told herself. This could really work. The ride to the ranch took about 40 minutes. The road wound through rolling prairie, the grass golden in the afternoon light. Warren pointed out landmarks as they went. A creek where the cattle liked to water, a stand of cottonwoods that provided shade in summer, the boundary line of his property marked by a fence line that stretched as far as Zara could see. 500 acres, Warren said, a note of pride in his voice. "Most of it is grazing land, but I have been building up the herd. Right now I have about 200 head of cattle, plus the horses. During spring and fall, I hire 2 ranch hands to help with branding and moving the cattle, but most of the year it is just me." Zara listened, watching the landscape roll by. It was so different from Boston. There, everything had been close and contained, buildings pressing against each other, streets crowded with people and carriages. Here, the sky seemed impossibly vast, and the land stretched out in every direction. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. "There," Warren said, pointing ahead. "That is home." The house sat on a gentle rise, a simple wooden structure painted white with a covered porch across the front. It was smaller than Zara had imagined, but solid-looking, built to withstand prairie winters and summer storms. Behind it, she could see a barn, a corral with several horses and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. As they drew closer, Zara could see more details. The porch had a bench and a rocking chair. Curtains hung in the windows, simple but clean. A vegetable garden struggled along one side of the house, the plants looking slightly neglected but alive. Warren pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Zara down. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it is sound. The roof does not leak and the stove works well. There are 2 bedrooms, a main room, and a kitchen." He carried her trunk inside, and Zara followed, her heart pounding with a different kind of nervousness now. This was going to be her home. This was going to be her life. The interior was as simple as the exterior. The main room held a table, 4 chairs, a sofa, and a bookshelf with a modest collection of books. The kitchen was functional, with a cast iron stove, a sink with a pump, and open shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was clean but clearly the domain of a man living alone. There were no decorative touches, no softness to the space. "Your room is here," Warren said, opening a door off the main room. "I have been using the other bedroom, so you will have your privacy until after the wedding." The room was small but adequate, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Zara set down her carpetbag and turned to find Warren watching her from the doorway. "I know this must all seem very strange," he said quietly. "Yesterday you were in Boston, and now you are here, about to marry a man you have never met in person. If you need time to adjust, to think things through, I will understand." Zara shook her head firmly. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "I made my choice when I answered your advertisement. I do not need more time. This is where I want to be." Warren read the note and some of the tension left his shoulders. "All right, then I will leave you to rest and freshen up. I need to tend to the animals, but I will be back in an hour or so to make supper." After he left, Zara sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. She had done it. She had traveled halfway across the country, revealed her deepest secret, and somehow, miraculously, she had been accepted. Warren Zimmerman was not the man of her dreams exactly, but he was honest and kind, and that was more than she had dared to hope for. She unpacked her carpetbag, hanging her 2 good dresses in the small wardrobe and setting her few personal items on the dresser. There was not much. A silver brush that had been her mother's, a small framed photograph of her parents, and a few books. Her whole life, condensed into 1 trunk and 1 bag. When Warren returned, she found him in the kitchen, building up the fire in the stove. "Can you cook?" he asked as she entered. Zara nodded and wrote, "Yes. My mother taught me." "Good. I can manage, but I am not gifted at it. Maybe you can take a look at what I have on hand and see if you can make something decent. I usually just fry some bacon and make biscuits, but it gets old." Zara explored the kitchen, taking inventory. There was flour, cornmeal, beans, bacon, salt pork, potatoes, onions, and a few other staples. It was simple fare, but she could work with it. She wrote, "I can make a stew for tonight if you have time to let it cook." "Time I have," Warren said. "I will help you." They worked together in the kitchen, and Zara found a strange comfort in the routine. Warren chopped potatoes and onions while she browned the salt pork and assembled the other ingredients. They moved around each other carefully, still learning the rhythm of sharing space. Occasionally, Warren would ask her a question, and she would write a brief answer, but mostly they worked in companionable silence. As the stew simmered on the stove, filling the house with savory smells, Warren made coffee and they sat at the table together. The evening light slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Tell me about Boston," Warren said. "Your letters mentioned it, but I would like to hear more." Zara wrote for several minutes, describing the city she had left behind. The crowded streets, the harbor with its tall ships, the markets and theaters. She wrote about her parents, about the textile business her father had managed, about the small house in a respectable neighborhood where she had grown up. She wrote about her education, the books she loved, the quiet life she had led. Warren read each page carefully, asking questions occasionally, genuinely interested. When she described her parents' death, his expression softened with sympathy. That must have been hard, losing both of them so close together. Zara nodded, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. She wrote, "It was the worst time of my life. I thought I would die too. Sometimes I wished I had." "But you did not," Warren said quietly. "You survived. You built a new life, alone in a city that had turned away from you. That takes courage. No one had ever put it quite that way before." Most people had seen her survival as merely enduring, getting by. Warren saw it as an act of courage, and something in Zara's heart shifted at his words. They ate dinner as the sun set, the stew simple but satisfying. Warren complimented her cooking, and Zara felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. After dinner, Warren taught her how to work the pump at the sink, showed her where he kept the various supplies, explained the routine of the ranch. There was a lot to learn, but Zara had always been a quick study. As darkness fell, Warren lit the lamps and they sat in the main room. He read a book while she wrote a letter to a former neighbor in Boston, letting her know she had arrived safely. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind of quiet that did not need to be filled with chatter. When Zara began to yawn, Warren set aside his book. "You must be exhausted. That stagecoach ride is rough even for people used to travel." Zara nodded. She was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical weariness into something deeper. "Get some rest," Warren said. "Tomorrow will be a big day." Zara wrote, "Good night, Warren. Thank you for everything." He read the note and nodded. "Good night, Miss Bennett. Sleep well." In her small room, Zara changed into her nightgown and crawled under the quilts. The bed was comfortable, the room cool, and outside her window, she could hear the vast silence of the prairie night. No city sounds, no neighbors, just the whisper of wind through grass and the distant lowing of cattle. She had expected to lie awake for hours, her mind churning with thoughts of the wedding tomorrow, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep and did not wake until sunlight streamed through her window the next morning. When she emerged from her room, dressed in her best dress of deep blue wool, she found Warren already up making coffee. He had shaved and put on clean clothes, a white shirt and dark trousers that made him look more formal than she had seen him yet. "Morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." Zara nodded and wrote, "Very well. What time is the wedding?" 11 o'clock at the church in town. Helen will meet us there and Thomas. The Reverend is expecting us." He poured her a cup of coffee and pushed it across the table. "Are you nervous?" Zara considered the question as she sipped the strong, bitter coffee. Was she nervous? Yes, but it was a different kind of nervousness than she had felt yesterday. Yesterday had been about fear of rejection. Today was about stepping into an entirely new life, binding herself to a man she barely knew and trusting that they could build something good together. She wrote, "A little." "But ready?" Warren nodded. "I am nervous too, if it helps. I have been a bachelor for 26 years. Having a wife will take some getting used to." There was something endearing about his honesty. Zara appreciated that he did not try to pretend this was easy or simple. They were both taking a leap of faith. They ate a quick breakfast of fried eggs and biscuits. Then Warren hitched up the wagon again for the drive back to Nebraska City. The morning was clear and bright, the air already warm with the promise of a hot afternoon. Zara wore her best bonnet and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from around the house. It was not much, but it made the occasion feel more real. The church was a simple white building at the edge of town, with a small cemetery behind it. Helen and Thomas were waiting on the steps, Helen in a pretty yellow dress and Thomas in his Sunday suit. Helen rushed forward as soon as the wagon stopped. "Oh, you look beautiful," she exclaimed, taking Zara's hands. "That dress is perfect. Are you ready?" Zara nodded and Helen squeezed her hands. "Do not worry. The Reverend knows about your condition. Warren sent word this morning. Everything is arranged." Inside, the church was cool and dim, smelling of wood polish and old hymn books. Reverend Thompson was a kindly-looking man in his 50s with silver hair and gentle eyes. He shook Warren's hand and smiled warmly at Zara. "Welcome, my dear. Warren has explained your situation, and I want you to know that we will adapt the ceremony accordingly. You need only nod when I ask if you take Warren as your husband. God hears the intention of the heart, not just the words of the mouth." Zara felt tears prick her eyes at his kindness. She wrote quickly, "Thank you, Reverend." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Zara stood beside Warren in front of the simple altar, very aware of his presence, the warmth of his body next to hers, the calluses on his hand when he took hers. Reverend Thompson read the traditional words, and Warren repeated his vows in his deep, steady voice. When it was Zara's turn, she nodded solemnly, her eyes locked with Warren's, and spoke her vows in the silence of her heart. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Warren hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead. It was chaste and respectful, but Zara felt the gesture all the way to her toes. They signed the register, Helen and Thomas as witnesses, and then they were married. Mrs. Zara Zimmerman, wife of a Nebraska rancher, mistress of 500 acres of prairie land, Helen hugged her tightly. "You will be happy here," she whispered. "I know it." After the ceremony, Helen insisted they come to the feed store for a small celebration. She had prepared a cake and lemonade, and a few other townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations. Zara met the storekeeper, Mr. Hughes, and his wife, the blacksmith, and several others. They were curious about her, she could tell, but also welcoming. When they learned she could not speak, there was surprise, but no one was unkind. Helen, bless her, managed the introduction smoothly, explaining Zara's situation matter-of-factly and moving conversations along before awkwardness could settle in. By mid-afternoon, Warren and Zara were back in the wagon heading toward the ranch. The reality of what they had just done hung between them, unspoken but present. They were married now. This was no longer a trial arrangement or an experiment. They were bound together for better or worse. As they crested the rise that brought the ranch house into view, Warren said, "I want you to know that I meant what I said yesterday. I need a partner, not just a housekeeper. You have a good mind, and I want to use it. The ranch books need proper keeping, and there are decisions to be made about when to sell cattle, what supplies to order, a dozen things. I have been managing alone, but 2 heads are better than 1. Zara wrote, "I would like that. I am good with numbers. Good. Then starting tomorrow, I will show you how everything works, and we can begin planning for the fall sale." He glanced at her. "But tonight is our wedding night. We should take some time to just rest and get to know each other better. No work talk, just us." Zara appreciated his thoughtfulness. When they arrived at the house, Warren carried her trunk to the main bedroom, the one he had been using. He had clearly spent time that morning making it presentable, changing the sheets and clearing space in the wardrobe for her things. "I will give you some privacy to settle in," he said, his ears slightly red. "Take your time." Alone in the bedroom, Zara unpacked her trunk, hanging her dresses and putting away her underthings. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. This was her wedding night. She was 24 years old, educated in the ways of the world, and she knew what was expected. But knowing in theory and facing reality were 2 different things. Warren was kind, she reminded herself. He had been respectful and patient. Whatever happened tonight, he would not force her or hurt her. She had to trust in that. When she finally emerged, she found Warren in the kitchen preparing dinner. He had changed out of his wedding clothes into his everyday shirt and denims, and there was something comforting about that return to normalcy. "I thought we could make this together," he said. "You can teach me how you make biscuits. Mine always come out hard as rocks." They cooked side by side, and Warren proved to be a willing student, carefully following Zara's written instructions as she showed him how to work the dough just enough but not too much. The biscuits that came out of the oven were golden and fluffy, and Warren's face lit up with genuine delight. "You are a miracle worker," he said, breaking one open and watching the steam rise. "These are the best biscuits I have ever made." Zara laughed silently, her shoulders shaking with mirth, and Warren grinned at her. It was the first truly relaxed moment between them, and it felt like breaking through a barrier. They ate dinner at the table as the sun set, talking in their peculiar way. Warren would ask questions, and Zara would write answers, and slowly they began to fill in the details that letters could not convey. Warren told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his father's death when he was 16, and his decision to head west and make his own way. He talked about the hard first years, working for other ranchers, learning everything he could, saving money. He spoke with pride about buying his first acre, then his first 100, building the herd one cow at a time. Zara wrote about her love of books, about the library in Boston where she had spent so many hours. She told him about her skill with sewing and her work as a bookkeeper. She admitted her fears about coming west, about being so far from everything she had known. "You regret it?" Warren asked. "Coming here," Zara thought for a moment, then wrote, "No, I think this is where I am supposed to be." As darkness fell and the lamps were lit, the reality of the night ahead settled over them again. Warren cleared his throat awkwardly. "Zara, I want you to know that I have expectations as a husband, but I am not a brute. If you need more time to adjust, to feel comfortable, I can wait." Zara's heart swelled at his consideration. She wrote, "You are kind, but I am your wife now. I understand what that means." Warren read the note, and something in his expression shifted. He stood up and held out his hand. "Then come with me." Zara took his hand, letting him lead her to the bedroom. Her heart was pounding, but it was not entirely from fear. Warren closed the door behind them and turned to face her in the lamplight. "I have never done this before," he said quietly. "I want to be honest about that. I have worked too hard building this ranch to spend time courting or visiting the saloons, so if I am clumsy, I apologize in advance." His honesty touched her. Zara wrote quickly, "I have never done this either. We will figure it out together." What happened next was tender and awkward and sweet. Warren was gentle with her, patient, taking his time. There was pain, as she had been warned, but also unexpected intimacy, a connection that went beyond words. When it was over, Warren held her close, his arms strong and warm around her, and Zara felt something shift deep in her chest. This man was her husband now, in every sense of the word. They were bound together, and somehow that felt right. "Are you all right?" Warren whispered against her hair. Zara nodded against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, soap and sweat and something uniquely Warren. She was more than all right. She was exactly where she needed to be. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and when Zara woke in the early morning light, she found Warren still beside her, his face soft in sleep. She studied him, this stranger who was now her husband, and felt a flutter of something that might have been the beginning of love. The days that followed fell into a routine that was both foreign and comforting. Warren woke before dawn to tend the animals, and Zara learned to wake with him, preparing breakfast while he worked. After breakfast, he began teaching her about the ranch, showing her how to read the brand on the cattle, how to check the fence lines, how to recognize when an animal was sick. She was a quick learner, and Warren was a patient teacher. In the afternoons, they worked on the ranch books together. Warren's record-keeping had been haphazard at best, and Zara set about bringing order to the chaos. She created ledgers for expenses and income, tracked the size of the herd, and began planning for the fall cattle sale. Warren watched her work with appreciation. "I should have married an educated woman years ago," he said one afternoon as she tallied columns of numbers. "This would have saved me so many headaches," Zara wrote. "Better late than never." As the weeks passed, they grew more comfortable with each other. Warren learned to anticipate her needs, watching her expressions and body language. Zara developed a kind of shorthand in her notebook, quick phrases that Warren could read at a glance. They developed routines and rhythms, learning the dance of living together. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Warren came in from the barn looking troubled. Zara was stirring a pot of beans on the stove, and she turned when she heard his heavy footsteps. "We have a problem," Warren said. "One of the cows is down in the south pasture, and I think she is trying to calve but having trouble. I need to go help her, but it might take all night." Zara set down her spoon and wrote, "Can I help?" Warren hesitated. "It is hard work and it might be unpleasant." "I do not want to ask too much of you," Zara wrote firmly. "I am a rancher's wife now. This is part of my job. I want to help." Warren studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, get your boots and a coat. It is going to be a long night." They rode out to the south pasture together, Warren on his gray horse and Zara on a gentle mare named Daisy that Warren had said was now hers. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of orange and gold. When they reached the cow, Zara could see immediately that she was in distress, lying on her side and breathing heavily. Warren dismounted and approached the cow carefully, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. Zara stayed back, watching as he examined the animal. After a few minutes, he came back to where she stood. "The calf is breech," he said. "I am going to have to turn it and then help pull it out. It is going to take both of us. Are you sure you are up for this?" Zara nodded firmly. She had never assisted with a birth before, human or animal, but she was not squeamish, and she trusted Warren to tell her what to do. For the next 2 hours, they worked together in the fading light and then by lantern. Warren coached her through every step, and Zara followed his instructions precisely, holding the cow's head, helping to steady the calf, pulling when Warren told her to pull. The cow bellowed in pain and Zara's muscles burned with effort, but she did not give up. Finally, with a rush of fluid and one last mighty pull, the calf slid free. It lay still for a terrifying moment, and then it shuddered and took its first breath. The cow immediately began licking her baby, her maternal instincts overriding her exhaustion. Warren sat back on his heels, covered in blood and fluid, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it. You helped bring new life into the world." Zara was equally messy, her dress and coat ruined, her hands shaking from effort, but she felt a fierce pride burning in her chest. She had done this. She had helped save the calf and the cow. She was truly a rancher's wife now. Warren reached over and squeezed her hand. "Thank you. I could not have done this without you." They stayed for another hour, making sure the calf could stand and nurse, that the cow was stable. Then they rode back to the ranch house in the darkness, exhausted but triumphant. At the house, Warren helped Zara down from her horse. "Go get cleaned up," he said. "I will tend to the horses and be in shortly." Zara heated water and washed as best she could, changing into clean clothes. When Warren came in, he did the same, and then they collapsed at the table together, too tired to do more than eat some bread and cheese. "That was one of the hardest things I have ever done," Warren said, "but also one of the best. Seeing that calf take its first breath, knowing we saved it." He looked at Zara. "You were amazing tonight, strong and brave and steady. I am proud to have you as my partner." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. She wrote, "I am proud to be your partner. Thank you for trusting me to help." That night when they crawled into bed, Warren held her close. "I am starting to realize something," he said softly. "When I advertised for a wife, I thought I just needed help with the ranch, someone to share the work. But you are so much more than that. You are becoming my best friend." Zara pressed closer to him, her heart full. She was starting to realize the same thing. What had begun as a practical arrangement was becoming something deeper, something real. As summer turned to fall, the ranch thrived. The cattle grew fat on prairie grass, and the herd increased with new calves. Zara's bookkeeping showed a healthy profit, and they began making plans for improvements. A new barn, more fencing, perhaps a few more horses. Warren consulted Zara on every decision, valuing her opinion and her insight. In town, Zara became a familiar figure. The initial curiosity about the mail-order bride who could not speak faded into acceptance. Helen became a close friend, stopping by the ranch regularly for visits. Other ranch wives reached out, and slowly Zara built a community. She learned that her silence, which had been such a barrier in Boston society, mattered less here, where people were judged by their work and their character, not their ability to make small talk. One October evening, about 6 months after the wedding, Warren and Zara were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their routine, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Warren was reading a letter from a cattle buyer, and Zara was mending a shirt when Warren suddenly set down the letter and looked at her. "Zara, can I tell you something?" She set down her mending and nodded, giving him her full attention. Warren seemed to struggle with his words, his brow furrowed. "When I placed that advertisement, I thought I knew what I wanted. A practical arrangement, a partnership I did not expect." He paused, then started again. "What I am trying to say is that I have fallen in love with you." Zara's breath caught. She had felt it growing between them, this deepening connection, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. "I know it might not be what you signed up for," Warren continued, "and I do not expect you to feel the same way, but I wanted you to know. You are not just my wife or my partner. You are the person I think about when I wake up, the person I want to share every sunset with. You have made this house a home and my life fuller and richer. I love you, Zara Zimmerman." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she grabbed her notebook. Her hand shook as she wrote, "I love you too. I did not expect it either, but somewhere along the way you became everything to me. You saw past my silence to who I really am. You gave me a home and a purpose and a life worth living. I love you with all my heart." Warren read the note, and his face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been building for months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Your voice does not matter," Warren said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "Not because I do not wish you could speak, but because I hear you in every other way. I hear you in your laughter, in your kindness, in the way you care for the animals, in the way you have made this ranch thrive. I hear you, Zara. I always have." Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Zara thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been alone in Boston, voiceless and purposeless, watching her life drain away into nothing. Now she had a husband who loved her, a ranch that was thriving, friends who valued her, and a future full of possibility. Her silence, which had once defined her in such negative ways, had become simply one aspect of who she was, not the whole story. The fall cattle sale was a success, bringing in more money than Warren had dared to hope. They celebrated by ordering supplies for the new barn and treating themselves to a few luxuries. A new dress for Zara, a better saddle for Warren, a set of china for the house. As winter approached, they prepared the ranch for the cold months ahead, stocking supplies and bringing the cattle in closer. Winter on the prairie was harsh but beautiful. Snow covered everything in white, and the wind howled around the house at night. But inside, the house was warm and cozy. Warren and Zara spent the long evenings together, reading by lamplight, playing cards, planning for spring. Zara taught Warren how to play chess, and he proved to be a quick learner, giving her fierce competition. Warren taught Zara how to whittle, and she began carving small wooden animals that they displayed on the mantel. It was during one of these quiet winter evenings that Zara realized her monthly courses were late. At first, she attributed it to stress or the change in lifestyle, but as weeks passed and her body began to change in other subtle ways, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She wanted Warren's child desperately, but she worried about how her inability to speak might affect her ability to be a mother. How could she call to a child in danger? How could she sing lullabies or tell bedtime stories? The fears circled in her mind, growing larger with each passing day. Warren noticed her preoccupation. "What is wrong?" he asked one evening when she had been staring at her book for 20 minutes without turning a page. "You have been distant all week." Zara set down the book and reached for her notebook. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "I think I am carrying your child." Warren read the note and his face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, joy, concern. "You are pregnant, are you certain?" Zara nodded. Warren pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "That is wonderful news. We are going to have a baby." Then he pulled back, studying her face. "But you are not happy. What is wrong?" Zara wrote for several minutes, pouring out all her fears and concerns. Warren read every word carefully, his expression growing more serious. When she finished, he set down the notebook and took both her hands in his. "Zara, listen to me. You are going to be an amazing mother. Yes, there will be challenges, but we will face them together. We will figure out ways to keep our child safe. We will use bells and signals. I will be here to help. And think about what you can offer: patience, creativity, love. A child needs those things far more than they need a voice." He squeezed her hands. "You have spent your whole life being told what you cannot do because of your silence. But I have watched you do impossible things. You left everything you knew to come to a place you had never seen. You learned to run a ranch. You helped birth a calf in the middle of the night. You turned a house into a home. You made me fall in love with you. If you can do all that, you can certainly raise a child." Zara felt the fear loosening its grip on her heart. Warren was right. She had overcome so many obstacles already. She could overcome this one too, she wrote. "We will need to think through the practical aspects. Warning systems, ways to communicate in emergencies." "We will," Warren agreed. "We have months to prepare and plan. We will make this work, Zara, I promise you." Spring came, bringing new life to the prairie. The grass turned green, wildflowers bloomed in waves of color, and Zara's belly began to swell with their child. Helen was thrilled by the news and became a constant source of advice and support. She had 2 children of her own and helped Zara prepare for the baby's arrival. Together, Warren and Zara set up the second bedroom as a nursery. They ordered a cradle from a catalog and made quilts and clothes. Warren installed a system of bells throughout the house so Zara could summon him if she needed help. They practiced emergency signals, ways Zara could alert Warren to danger even without her voice. As her pregnancy advanced, Zara found herself feeling more confident. She might not be able to call out to her child, but she could communicate in so many other ways. She would teach her child from infancy to watch for her signals, to respond to touch and gesture as well as voice. It would be different from other families, but different did not mean worse. The baby came in late June, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and shook the house. The local midwife, Mrs. Henderson, attended along with Helen. Warren paced in the main room, helpless and anxious, while Zara labored in the bedroom. It was the hardest thing Zara had ever done. She wanted to scream, to cry out, but she could only clench her teeth and grip Helen's hand as wave after wave of pain washed over her. Mrs. Henderson coached her through it, telling her when to push, when to breathe, and Helen whispered encouragement in her ear. Finally, as the storm reached its peak, the baby came with a rush, slipping into Mrs. Henderson's capable hands. "A boy," the midwife announced, and then the most beautiful sound Zara had ever heard filled the room. Her son's first cry, Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Zara's arms. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and Warren's deep brown eyes. He quieted as soon as he felt his mother's warmth, and Zara looked down at him with her heart so full she thought it might burst. Helen stepped out to get Warren, and he burst into the room moments later, his face white with worry. "Zara, are you all right?" Zara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. She shifted the baby so Warren could see him, and Warren's expression transformed. He knelt beside the bed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch his son's tiny hand. "He is perfect," Warren whispered, his own eyes wet. "You did it, Zara. You brought our son into the world." They named him William, after Warren's father, and from the moment he entered the world, William was loved beyond measure. Zara discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, silence or no silence. She learned to communicate with her son through touch and expression, and William learned from his earliest days to watch his mother's face for cues. When he cried, she could not sing to him, but she could rock him and hold him and love him, and that was enough. Warren was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. In the evenings, he would hold William and tell him stories, his deep voice filling the house. Zara would watch them together, her heart full of love for both of them. As William grew, they developed their own language as a family. Zara taught William simple signs for important words: hungry, tired, mama, papa. Warren would speak the words aloud as Zara signed them, so William learned both. By the time he was a year old, William could communicate with his mother as easily as with his father, moving fluidly between spoken language and gesture. "He is brilliant," Helen said one afternoon when she came to visit and watched William sign to his mother that he wanted a drink. "I have never seen anything like it. He adapts," Zara wrote. "Children are good at that. He does not know this is unusual. To him, it is just how our family works." The ranch continued to prosper. With Zara managing the books and Warren managing the land and livestock, they made a formidable team. They expanded the herd, bought more land, and hired 2 permanent ranch hands. The ranch that Warren had built with his own 2 hands was becoming one of the most successful in the county. When William was 2, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy. She knew she could do this. She had proven it with William, and she would prove it again. Their daughter arrived in the spring, a beautiful girl with Zara's light brown hair and delicate features. They named her Grace, and she was as different from William as night from day. Where William had been serious and watchful from birth, Grace was all smiles and laughter. She was vocal from the start, babbling and cooing, and seemed to delight in the sound of her own voice. "She is making up for you," Warren teased one evening as Grace babbled happily in her cradle, "getting all the words out that you are keeping in." Zara laughed silently and wrote, "She is perfect. They both are." As the children grew, they became the center of Zara and Warren's world. William was thoughtful and kind, taking after both his parents in temperament. He showed an early aptitude for working with animals and would follow Warren around the ranch, asking endless questions. Grace was spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries. Both children were bilingual in their own way, moving seamlessly between spoken English and the sign language their mother had taught them. To them, it was completely normal that Mama did not speak with her mouth. They never questioned it, never saw it as strange. It was simply how their family worked. One afternoon, when William was 5 and Grace was 3, a traveling salesman stopped at the ranch. Zara was in the garden with the children when he rode up, and she sent William to fetch his father from the barn. While they waited, the salesman tried to make conversation. "Afternoon, madam. Fine day, is it not?" Zara nodded and smiled but did not speak. The salesman waited, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Cat got your tongue?" he finally asked, chuckling at his own joke. "My mama does not talk," Grace piped up matter-of-factly. "But she is not stupid. She talks with her hands." The salesman looked taken aback. "Oh, I did not mean it is all right," William said with the gravity of a much older child. "People do not understand sometimes. But Mama understands everything, and she can tell us anything she wants. She just does it differently." Zara felt a surge of love and pride for her children. They understood, even at their young ages, that she was not less than because she could not speak. She was simply different, and different was fine. When Warren arrived and dealt with the salesman, Zara pulled both children close and hugged them tight. They had given her a gift, not just their love and acceptance, but also their fierce defense of her. They were growing up knowing that there were many ways to communicate, many ways to be in the world, and that was a lesson that would serve them well their whole lives. The years passed in a blur of work and joy. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Zara and Warren's love deepened into something unshakable. They had their challenges, certainly. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, injuries and illnesses. But they faced everything together, and their partnership never wavered. When William was 10 and Grace was 8, they had a third child, another boy they named Joseph. By then, the ranch house had been expanded twice, and they had a crew of 5 permanent ranch hands. The Zimmerman Ranch was known throughout the county as one of the best-run operations, and people often remarked on the strong partnership between Warren and his silent wife. Zara still remembered the girl who had stepped off that stagecoach 14 years ago, terrified and alone, clutching a letter of explanation and praying for acceptance. That girl had been so afraid that her silence would make her unworthy of love, unworthy of a full life. But she had been wrong. Her silence had never been the barrier she had thought it was. It was simply part of who she was, like her brown hair or her skill with numbers. Warren had seen that from the beginning. On that first day, when she had handed him the letter explaining her condition, he had looked past the silence to see her. He had valued her mind, her character, her strength. He had said something that had changed everything. "What I need is a partner who can think, who can work hard, who can be trusted." And she had been all those things. She had been his partner in every sense of the word. They had built this life together, this family, this legacy, and it was good. One evening, when Joseph was tucked into bed and the older children were doing their lessons at the table, Warren pulled Zara out onto the porch. The sun was setting over the prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. They stood together, his arm around her waist, watching the light fade. "You remember the first time we stood here together?" Warren asked. "You had just arrived and you were so nervous. I could see it in every line of your body." Zara nodded, leaning into him. "I have been thinking about that day a lot lately," Warren continued. about how scared you must have been coming all this way to marry a stranger, about how brave you were to take that risk. He turned to face her. I want you to know something. When I said your voice did not matter, I did not mean it quite the way it sounded. Your voice does matter, Zara. It matters here. He touched her chest, right over her heart. It matters in every choice you make, every kindness you show, every idea you have. Your voice is in everything you do. I hear it every day in 1,000 different ways. Zara felt tears welling up. After all these years, Warren could still surprise her with his insight, his understanding. She had long since made peace with her silence, but to know that he saw beyond it, that he heard her voice in other ways, meant everything. She pulled out the small notebook she still carried, though she needed it less these days. Most of their communication happened without words now, a look or a gesture often sufficient. But some things needed to be written down, made permanent. She wrote, "You gave me something I never thought I would have. You made me believe that I was worthy of love, worthy of a full life. You saw me when I felt invisible. You heard me when I had no voice. You are my home, Warren Zimmerman, and I will love you until my last breath." Warren read the note, his eyes shining with emotion. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "I am the lucky one," he whispered into her hair. "I put out that advertisement hoping for a competent partner, and instead I got you. A brilliant, brave, beautiful woman who made all my dreams come true. I love you, Zara. Today, tomorrow, forever." They stood together on the porch as night fell. Two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other. Behind them, the house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Inside, their children were safe and loved. Around them, the land they had built together stretched out in every direction. Zara thought about the stagecoach that had brought her here all those years ago, rolling through the dust to this spot. She thought about the girl she had been, so afraid and uncertain. If she could go back and tell that girl anything, what would she say? She would say, "Have courage. Have faith. Your silence does not define you. You are so much more than what you cannot do. And waiting for you in Nebraska is a man who will see that, who will love you not despite your silence, but because of everything you are. He will hear your voice in ways you never imagined. He will give you a home and a family and a love that will sustain you through everything life brings. And he will tell you on your very first day together something you desperately need to hear. Your voice matters here." Zara had arrived in silence, but her life had been anything but silent. It had been full of love and laughter, hard work and joy, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. She had 3 beautiful children who understood that there were many ways to communicate, many ways to be in the world. She had a husband who loved her completely, who heard her voice in everything she did. She had friends and a community and a ranch that bore her mark as much as Warren's. Her voice mattered. It always had. It had just taken coming to Nebraska, meeting a cowboy named Warren Zimmerman, and building a life together on the prairie to truly understand that. As they finally went inside, Warren's hand warm in hers, Zara looked around at the home they had created. William was helping Grace with her arithmetic. Baby Joseph was sleeping peacefully in his cradle. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the house smelled of the bread she had baked that morning. This was her life. This was her voice, and it was everything she had ever wanted and more. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the natural progression of life on a thriving ranch. William grew into a young man who had his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. At 16, he was already indispensable on the ranch, managing the herd with skill beyond his years. Grace, at 14, was becoming a fine horsewoman, much to Warren's delight, and she had inherited her mother's gift for numbers. Joseph, now 6, was the sunshine of the family, always laughing and finding joy in the smallest things. The ranch itself had grown beyond Warren's wildest dreams. What had started as 500 acres and a small herd now encompassed over 1,000 acres and several hundred head of cattle. They had built a proper barn, expanded the house again to accommodate their growing family, and established themselves as one of the premier cattle operations in eastern Nebraska. But more than the material success, it was the richness of their family life that made Zara's heart full. The children had grown up seeing their parents' partnership as the model for their own future relationships. They had learned that love was built on respect, communication in all its forms, and shared purpose. One evening in late summer, when Zara was 40 years old, the family gathered on the expanded porch after supper. It had become their tradition, this time together at day's end. Warren sat in his rocking chair, Joseph on his lap. William and Grace occupied the porch swing, and Zara sat in her own chair, her hands busy with mending. "Papa," Grace said suddenly, "I have been meaning to ask you something. How did you and Mama decide to get married? I mean, you had never met. Was it not frightening?" Warren glanced at Zara, a smile playing at his lips. "It was terrifying," he admitted, "for both of us. Your Mama came all the way from Boston to marry a man she had only known through letters. But how did you know you would be happy?" William asked, his practical mind always seeking to understand cause and effect. "We did not know," Warren said honestly. "We hoped, we trusted, and we committed to making it work, whatever came." He looked at Zara, and the love in his eyes made her heart skip a beat even after all these years. "Your Mama took the biggest risk of all. She came here with a secret she was afraid would make me reject her." "Because she cannot speak?" Grace asked. The children knew the story, but they loved hearing it. "Because she could not speak," Warren confirmed. "She was afraid I would send her back to Boston when I found out. But you know what I realized that very first day?" "What?" Joseph asked, looking up at his father with wide eyes. "I realized that speaking and communicating are not the same thing. Your Mama has always had a voice. She just uses it differently than most people, and I learned to listen in a different way." He met Zara's eyes across the porch. "She taught me that there are many ways to be heard, many ways to matter." Zara felt tears pricking her eyes. Even now, after nearly 2 decades of marriage, Warren could make her feel seen and valued in ways that took her breath away. "I think it is romantic," Grace declared. "Mama was so brave, coming all this way. And you were brave too, Papa, taking a chance on someone you had never met." "Sometimes the best things in life require bravery," Warren said. "Your Mama and I were both brave enough to take a chance, and look what we built." He gestured to encompass not just the ranch but the family gathered together. "This is what courage looks like." As darkness fell and the children eventually drifted off to bed, Warren and Zara remained on the porch. It was their time, these quiet moments after the children slept, when they could simply be together without the demands of the day intruding. Warren reached over and took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said. "William will be ready to take on more responsibility soon. Maybe in a few years we could take a trip. Go see Boston if you wanted. Show me where you came from." Zara considered this, then pulled out her notebook. She wrote, "Boston is my past. This is my home. But I would like to travel with you someday. Maybe see California or the mountains, new places we can discover together." Warren read her note and smiled. "I would like that. New adventures, even at our age." Zara wrote, "We are not old. I am 40 and you are 42. We have many years ahead of us yet." "Many years," Warren agreed. "And I intend to spend every one of them with you." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast prairie sky. Zara thought about the journey that had brought her here, to this porch, this man, this life. It had not always been easy. There had been hard winters and difficult times, moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, she and Warren had held fast to each other, building something strong and true. She thought about the young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago, terrified and alone. She wanted to reach back through time and tell her, "It is going to be all right, better than all right. You are going to be happy. You are going to be loved. You are going to matter. Your voice matters here." Those words, spoken on her first day in Nebraska, had changed everything. Warren had seen past her silence to the person she was, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift, the freedom to be fully herself. As the years continued to unfold, that gift multiplied and grew. William married a kind young woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the northern section of the Zimmerman land. Grace shocked everyone by announcing her intention to become a teacher, and she went to Lincoln for training. She returned 2 years later with a teaching certificate and a fierce determination to open a school in Nebraska City, where all children, regardless of ability or circumstance, would be welcome. Joseph, true to his sunny nature, became the social heart of the family, the one who brought everyone together for gatherings and celebrations. He had a gift for making people feel welcome and valued, a trait that served him well when he eventually took over managing the business side of the ranch. Through it all, Zara and Warren remained the steady center, the foundation upon which their children built their own lives. They grew older together, their hair going gray, their faces acquiring the lines and character of a life well lived. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of partnership and shared experience. When Zara turned 50, Warren surprised her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover in gold letters. "I know you have always kept notebooks," he said as she opened it with wondering fingers, "but I thought maybe you might want to write down our story, for the grandchildren when they come, so they will know how their grandmother came to Nebraska and made a life." Zara looked at the blank pages, and inspiration struck. She began writing that very evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a lamp burning bright. She wrote about Boston and the loneliness of those years after her parents died. She wrote about seeing Warren's advertisement and daring to hope. She wrote about the terrifying stagecoach ride and the even more terrifying moment of handing Warren that letter explaining her silence. She wrote about their wedding, about learning to run a ranch, about the birth of their children. She wrote about the hard times and the good times, the challenges overcome and the joys celebrated. And she wrote about love, about how it could grow between two strangers who had been brave enough to take a chance on each other. It took her 2 years to finish the journal, writing in the evenings when the house was quiet. When she finally completed it, she showed it to Warren. He read it cover to cover in one sitting, and when he finished, there were tears streaming down his weathered face. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is our legacy, Zara. Not just the ranch or the land, but this story. This proof that love can flourish in the most unexpected places between the most unlikely people." They kept the journal in a place of honor on the bookshelf. And as the grandchildren came, as William's children and eventually Joseph's and Grace's grew old enough to understand, they would take turns reading it to them. The children loved the story of their grandmother who could not speak, but who had spoken volumes through her actions, her love, and her unwavering courage. Zara and Warren had many more years together, years filled with the satisfaction of watching their children thrive and their grandchildren grow. The ranch continued to prosper under the family's management, becoming a multi-generational operation that provided employment and opportunity for many families in the county. As they grew older, Warren and Zara spent more time in their rocking chairs on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. They had earned their rest, everyone agreed. They had worked hard, raised a fine family, and built something that would last beyond their own lives. One evening, when Zara was 68 and Warren was 70, they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The house behind them hummed with activity as 3 generations gathered for Sunday supper. But for this moment, it was just the two of them. Warren reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. "Anything you wish had been different?" Zara pulled out the notebook she still carried, though her handwriting was shakier now, her fingers stiff with arthritis. She wrote, "Not one single regret. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a thing." Warren read her words and nodded, satisfied. "Neither would I. Every choice, every challenge, every joy, it all led us here. To this porch, this sunset, this life together. I would not trade it for anything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Inside, they could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of family. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to their hard work and vision. And between them flowed the deep, abiding love that had sustained them through everything. Zara thought about that first day, standing in the dust of Nebraska City's Main Street, so afraid and alone. She thought about Warren's words that had changed everything. "Your voice matters here." He had been right. Her voice had mattered. It had shaped this family, this ranch, this community. She had communicated through her actions, her love, her unwavering presence. She had taught her children and grandchildren that there were many ways to speak, many ways to be heard. And in doing so, she had found her own form of eloquence. The story that had begun with a mail-order bride arriving by stagecoach in silence had become a testament to the power of love, acceptance, and seeing beyond surface limitations to the person beneath. It had become a family legend, passed down through generations, inspiring courage and compassion in all who heard it. And at the center of it all was a simple truth, that Warren Zimmerman had looked past Zara's silence and seen her worth, and in return, she had given him everything she was. Together, they had built a life of meaning and purpose, proving that the strongest voices are not always the loudest ones. As darkness fell, and the family called them inside for supper, Warren helped Zara to her feet. They walked into the house together, their hands still linked as they had been for nearly 5 decades, ready to share one more meal, one more evening, one more precious moment of the extraordinary life they had built together. The stagecoach had brought her here in silence all those years ago, but Zara Bennett Zimmerman's life had been anything but quiet. It had been full of love and purpose, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. And it had all begun with a cowboy who understood that a voice does not need sound to matter, that communication comes in many forms, and that love sees past limitations to the infinite worth of the human heart. Their story was not just about a mail-order bride and a lonely rancher. It was about courage and acceptance, about seeing and being seen, about building something lasting through partnership and respect. It was about finding home in the most unexpected place and love in the most unlikely way. And as Zara looked around the table at her children and grandchildren, at Warren sitting beside her with his hand warm in hers, she knew with absolute certainty that her voice had mattered. It had mattered then, on that dusty Nebraska street when she first arrived. It had mattered through every day of their life together. And it would continue to matter, echoing through the generations that came after them, a testament to the truth that had changed her life. That worth is not measured in words spoken, but in lives touched, love given, and courage displayed. The evening ended as so many had before, with family gathered around, sharing stories and laughter. And when everyone had finally gone home or retired to bed, Warren and Zara stood together one last time on their porch, looking out at the stars scattered across the vast Nebraska sky. Warren pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. No words were needed. After all these years, they communicated in a language deeper than speech, a connection that transcended words. This was home. This was love. This was the life they had built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. And it was perfect.